Great. Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parasha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey at the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemen, and joining me my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter Day School at Long Island, Rabbi Jeremy Komanovsky, Anshe Chesed in New York. We want to start off and offer our tanchumim, our condolences to our good friend Rabbi David Wise. Rabbi David Wise on the passing of his mother this past week. Rabbi David Wise, of course, was one of the original Parsha talkers, way back in the when we rotated through, and of course at Ramah many summers, and we're just sending to him and to his family condolences. Hamakom Yinachem. We've talked about the message of condolence in previous editions here. We say, may you be comforted among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem and the mourners of the house of Israel, and may you have comfort from heaven as well. And we want to say this is Barry Chesler's Bar Mitzvah Parsha.
A mere 54 years ago.
Elisheva Malamit's Bat Mitzvah Parsha also.
And Carol's Bat Mitzvah portion too.
Okay, there you go. So we have a lot of affinity to this parsha. It happens to be an amazing parsha because they're all amazing.
This one's really amazing. This one's really amazing.
It starts with an amazing scene, and the amazing scene is that Jacob is running away. Vayetzei Yaakov mibe'er shava vayelech harana. In those words, right, 6 words, we have a complete compression of a whole journey. And of course, it invites the imagination, and it invites a homiletical imagination. I'm just wanting to turn to you, Barry, if you could share with us one of your favorite Divrei Torah on this, quoted in Rashi. Go ahead.
So what Rashi writes is, Lo yatzriach tov ela vayelech Yaakov Haran. It didn't have to mention that he left Beersheba. And so Rashi continues, V'lama hizkir yitziato. Why does it mention where he left from? Ella magid sheyitziat tzaddik min hamakom oser roshem. That when a tzaddik leaves a place, it makes an impression. While he's in a place, he has its beauty, its splendor, its glory, and when he leaves, that goes with him. And I like to use this in the senior minyan, which I've had the privilege to staff for many years, because the seniors are on their way out of high school, and I invite them to think about what kind of impression they want to leave when they're gone. And alternatively, what do they want to take with them from the school? And this provides a nice counterpoint to Yaakov, who is, taking a journey that is fraught with many difficulties. And, we hope that he will go and come back as a tzaddik.
So Rashi imagines him as a tzaddik right now, okay? Yeah. So, I mean, if you had a precocious kid in your class, they would ask, what some of my congregants ask me all the time, how could you refer to him as a tzaddik, right? And maybe there's a sense of a discord in the way that the Torah presents him and in the way that the rabbis have him in their imagination.
So I think one of the things that we overlook sometimes is that in classical Judaism, it exists in a kind of timelessness that in our lives is characterized by aging, at least for the two of you I can see. We get older and we develop, we mature, and Nebuch, one day we will depart like Yaakov HaTzadik, but the Torah kind of imagines everything happening in the present. So when Rashi says Jacob is a tzaddik, he's not referring to Jacob on the road then. He's referring to the Jacob that we come to know as the last of the 3 patriarchs, as if that's who he always was.
So interesting,
I think that in a sense, when you read the Torah, you're reading a book, and then there's a sense in which you are reading Judaism. So my personal favorite, as we discussed in the past, my personal favorite commentator is Ramban, the Nachmanides, and Rashi comments pretty much on every verse. Ibn Ezra comments pretty much on every verse. Ramban, like maybe 33%, but he writes longer. And I realized at a certain point that his text is not the Bible text. His text is Judaism. And he's interested not only in explaining a given verse, He's telling a story about what it's like to be a Jew, what Jews should care about, what our values should be. And so if you read the story about Jacob, there's lots of things about him that give you pause. His deception, his treatment of Esau, and by the way, that's just not just a modern reading. You know, Jeremiah, in Jeremiah chapter 9, he's got the great Kol ach akov Yaakov. Nobody should trust their brother because every brother twists and betrays. And kol ach akov Yaakov. Every brother Jacob's. So the Bible itself expresses the distress with Jacob's trickiness. If you read an individual story, you can say, this guy's not exciting. He's like a grasping, greedy, untrustworthy, not very nice person. And there may be other things about his relationships with his children or whatever. But if your text is Judaism, he's Yaakov Avinu.
Let me react to both of you and say that I want to take the word tzaddik and just change it for a second, which is, here's a larger than life character, or here's a person who is a personality in that world, and his departure creates a vacuum. And maybe that's, Rashi is intimating that the Vayetzei is that there's a vacuum that's created. And I'm thinking about this in both homiletical and personal ways. When you depart from your parental home, the tenderest moment that you have in a visit is departure, right? And I'm sure many people watching this, listening to this, and maybe the three of us have experienced, we get into the car and you wave and it's goodbye. And then, I have this experience when my kids leave, and you wave and you go back into your home, and there's a moment of emptiness, a moment of vacuum. And so we have to really understand Vayetzei Yaakov and really kind of augment the feeling of emptiness here.
Right. But there's also an important point to add here. And it's significant that Yaakov leaves from Beersheba, because Beersheba is associated with Yitzchak, who spent time in Beersheba, and with Abraham. So this is the kind of ancestral home of the patriarchs. And Jacob is not only going on his own journey, but he's continuing the journey of Abraham and Yitzchak as well.
Interesting. So that makes what I'm saying, Kal Vachomer, all the more intense, because he's leaving the ancestral 3-generational home. It's, imagine like these immigrant neighborhoods, where your father, your grandfather, your parents, your grandparents are living, and you depart for, I don't know, college, right? and you're not going to be the same. That's the point. And you're leaving a vacuum, and you split the screen here in this moment, and it's Jacob and it's the parents, and what a anguish it is, because Jacob has got nothing. He's got nothing to show for himself here, and he's leaving behind two parents who are practically bereft. She thinks of herself as a bereaved mother already, Rebecca, from last week's parsha. She said, am I going to lose both of you on the same day? And there's anguish.
I generally, that's quite rich on a personal level. I generally feel in somewhat contradistinction that the Torah works best not with characters and their personal lives in the way that we're talking about now, and works best on the level of mythic situations. So I want to throw in one homiletical turn from the mystical tradition, from the Zohar, which I think is just fabulously brilliant, and is also reflected in the Midrash, because Haran, where he's headed, is Mesopotamia. It's outside the land of Israel. It's where they came from before they reached the Promised Land. Yeah. And so part of what's going on in this story is that he's reaching the border of Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, and he's passing into the world out there. And it says the Malachei Elohim olim v'yordim bo. The angels are ascending and descending the ladder, often traditionally read as the Eretz Yisrael angels are going back to heaven, and the new, outside the land angels are going to come to accompany him in the next stage of his journey. So to get this next little homiletical piece, You have to know that in Aramaic, Haran means the other one, Acher, it's the other one. And in Kabbalah, especially that sense of the Sitra Achra, the quote, the other side, the demonic in the world. So Vayetzei Yaakov mi Beersheba, Jacob leaves the well of the seven, which is taken to be the seven lower sphirot. This is the realm of God. This is the realm of order. This is the realm of goodness. Vayelech Harana, and he goes towards the other side. He goes towards what's out there, what's different, what is not the realm of the divine. He's having an encounter with evil, which is a rich story because he's about to go to Lavan's house, and Lavan is sneaky and scary, and so I think that at some level, what's going on in the hero's journey, kind of story about Jacob, which is going to involve him having to go out to the other land, him having to deal with this major conflict with Lavan and his family, and all the problems with his own wives, children, and then he's going to have to come back, and at that borderline again, when he's going to come to this borderline again, 21 years later, he's going to have this titanic wrestling with the dark forces, with the wrestling with himself or wrestling with the angel, whatever. We'll talk about that next week. Yeah. But to me, one of the things that gives this story its power is that kind of mythic dimension of leaving safe place and going into scary place.
Right. So I would just add here, there's something of a theological conundrum here, because God at this point is really associated with a certain geography, with a certain space. We don't have the universal God that will appear in 2nd Isaiah, a God over the entire world. And it's worth thinking for a moment about how Jacob's journey is bracketed. When he leaves, just before he leaves the land, he has this great vision of the ladder, later taken over by United Synagogue for its own purposes. And when he comes back, he's going to have, just before he enters, a wrestling match. And this, I think, heightens what you were talking about, the conflict, Jeremy, with the other, but it also suggests how difficult it is to navigate the world, because you're not quite sure where you're leaving or where you're coming home to. And something is going to happen, and it's going to take you quite a while to be able to unpack it. I mean, we still talk about these two events thousands of years later.
Look, I love listening to both of you on this, because you've given such rich mythology and allegory, and I'm stuck. I'm one of the themes that I've been thinking about this year is how, and you've said it to me before, it's like, we're all committed to our own interpretations, and as much as I want to go there, I want to kind of doffen with you, and I want to kind of close my eyes, and I want to, walk in the streets of Manhattan and smell all of the,
It's disgusting. You don't want that. I'm telling
you. And drink a cup of, a glass of wine, and then get to the place where it's really, it's not what it's saying here. It's the remez of this, the hint of this, the deep mythology. And here I am, I'm thinking, here's a guy whose life has collapsed. He's got nothing, and he's leaving, and that's enough, in terms of an imaginative. And of course, I'm very attentive to the notion of the boundary, that he's leaving the boundary of the land, and he's stepping across into a different place, and it's the inversion of Abraham coming and all that, and that's the great literary arc of the Torah. But there's a profound human drama going on here, which I know you're attentive to, and you just fleshed out, of course, the broader echoes of it in the tradition. Let's go to the dream, and the Sulam, because the same thing happens with the Sulam. The Sulam, which we translate, based on, I think, our modern Hebrew, but it's also way back also in medieval and Mishnaic Hebrew. Sulam, we tend to translate as ladder, but it can mean a lot of different things. And so part of what happens in our interpretation here is we have this imagery of an actual ladder, of angels going up and down. And then there's the other idea that it's a ziggurat, like this Babylonian place. That's, you read people like Nahum Sarna, he talks about that. And then there is a lovely midrash that says that it's actually he's imagining the Mizbeach. It's gorgeous, and so the Malachim are not angels, but they're Kohanim. The Midrash says Kohen Gadol, but it's a bunch of Kohanim going up and down, and they're bringing the pieces of, well, in the dream they don't have anything. They're empty-handed. I think that's also incredibly evocative, because he's got nothing, right? And what is, so I'm going to give an interpretation based on the Midrash that he's dreaming of the Mizbeach. And
translate, explain a little bit more.
He's dreaming of the altar that's in the temple that has a ramp that the Kohanim, the priests, are going up and down on, and they're bringing pieces of the animals that they're being slaughtered, except for the fact that in the dream they have nothing. There's nothing that they're bringing here. Okay, so I want to tee this up for you to give me the alternate explanations, which with some of which you already touched on. That no, this is not the altar. This is something else going on.
Well, first of all, the altar is great, but let's just note that you're on our side of the mythic or homespun divide, right? Because the mythic claim is that, as we all know, and our readers may be interested to know, our listeners may be interested to know, that one of the very, very present themes in rabbinic midrash is that there is a Beit HaMikdash Shel Mata, an earthly temple, and a Beit HaMikdash Shel Mala, a heavenly temple, and that there are certain nexus points, and this would appear to be like that as an excellent. I think one of the reasons why that's a great midrash is that it partakes of that theme, and that we are at Ein Zeh Ki'im Beit Elohim B'zeh Sha'ar Shamayim. This is none other than the house of God and the gateway, which heaven and earth interpenetrate. But I'm going to go with a slightly different of the great midrashic traditions, is Malachei Elohim Olim V'Yordim Bo, that the divine angels were going up and down on him, and he is the human being. Is Jacob himself is the ladder, and that line about that he sees Sulam Mutzav Artza V'Rosho Magia Hashamayma, that the base of it is on earth and the top of it reaches towards heaven, is a pretty great description of the human being created in the image of God, both fully earthly and with the ability to reach towards heaven. I find that a pretty powerful motif.
What's worth thinking about here is, you mentioned the ziggurat before, Elliot, and that resonates with the Tower of Babel.
Yeah,
which also was something that was supposed to reach to heaven. And what we're left with at the end of the story of the Tower of Babel was confusion. But here we only have one person. And maybe it suggests that Jacob himself is confused, and that might explain his curious remark when he wakes up that God was in this place, and can't remember his name offhand, Lawrence
Kushner,
Kushner's great interpretation, I did not know that Jacob finds out something about himself as a result of this dream vision. And what does he find out? So here, just for a moment, think about which Jacob is at Beit El. Is it the Jacob who's fleeing for his life because essentially he screwed over his brother? Or is it the Jacob who, in an act of filial piety, is going back to the ancestral homeland to find a kosher wife for himself? And Jacob himself isn't quite sure why he's going. Is he going because he's fearful, or is he going to fulfill his destiny as his father did before him, by going to the ancestral homeland for a spouse? And we're left with this idea that Jacob finds in Beit El a confirmation that God will be with him wherever he goes. He left home, and I think we are invited to think that he thought he left God as well. But now God has come to confirm for him that God will be with him. And of course, David then does the transactional thing, which he's so well known for.
Okay, so we'll talk about that in a second. But so God does appear to him in a dream. We've established the imagery of the dream, which we're not going to go more into. And God promises, Ani, so first like that, Ani Adonai Elohei Avraham Avicha, I am the Lord God of your Abraham, your father, Elohei Yitzchak, God of your father Isaac. Elohei Yitzchak, just God of Isaac. Haaretz asher ata shochev alea, the land that you are lying on, lecha etnena ulezarecha. I'm giving it to you and to your offspring. Vayazaracha ka'afar haaretz, your seed will be like the sand of the dust of the land. Ufaratzta yama v'kedma v'tzafona v'negba. You're going to explode, expand to the west, to the east, to the north, and to the south. And through you, all of the families of the world will be blessed. I'm going to be with you, as you said. I'm going to guard you with everything, in every way that you go. I will bring you back to this land. Okay. And so it says, and then I will not abandon you. Yaakov. He wakes up. So again, I want to leap into his imagination, and you're saying that this is a reassurance, and I want to go there for a second, which is the sense of, is he worthy to receive this? Does he know that he's already received his father's blessing, right? And he's already but the blessing that Isaac gave him was not fleshed out really. What does he sense of himself, and does he have confidence, and is God here excusing his behavior? Because people can read this and say, look, he just stole two things from his brother, and now he's getting rewarded. How do you relate to this moment, and how would you relate to it if you were him?
Well, that's a good one for you, Jeremy.
I mean, whatever. I'm going to repeat what I said before, which is that seen through the lens of Judaism, not necessarily through the lens of, Genesis chapter 27 or whatever the scene was where he steals the blessing. Yaakov is the character who does something really incredible, totally amazing. He hits at the right place in a magic moment and discovers realms of religious, spiritual meaning, discovers the realms of truth that he could not have guessed at, is beyond his capacity for recognition. And he wakes up and says, Yesh Adonai, achen yesh Adonai b'makom hazeh, v'anochi lo yadati. I didn't even understand that there was God in this place. And now look what I've just been revealed. So does he deserve this blessing? Yes, if you read the story, first of all, I do think it is possible. Not just possible. I think it is also part of the story that Esav is an oaf, that Esav is an unworthy inheritor, and that Rivka saw it and engineered it such that Jacob becomes the official inheritor, and that's basically a good thing because of his generally good qualities. But also, if you read it through the story of his deception, then God should say, listen, you punk, don't go back home and apologize and make your mistakes right. But that's not the story that Judaism is telling. Judaism is the story that is telling that Yaakov is the third link in the chain, that mystical Judaism says Yaakov is the balance of all that is best about Abraham and Isaac and funnels that into blessing in the world. And so I think Jacob, as Judaism portrays him, is the people of Israel writ large who deserve this blessing. Yes.
I think there's God is indebted to Abraham also, and so Abraham looms large here in some way, because there's just such extraordinariness, and God has made a promise, and God is going to fulfill the promise, and this is the way human beings have partnered with God to make this promise come to fruition, and regardless of his moral bearing right now, things are moving in that direction. There are forces that are beyond him, that are pushing him, and that are
forces beyond him. Yeah, forces beyond him. Absolutely right.
Yes.
So, but there's also perhaps something else going on here, because when he leaves home, I think that it has to cross his mind either as a thought or perhaps as a belief that he's not going to see his parents again.
Yeah.
So when God comes and says, I am the God of Abraham, I am the God of Isaac, I am with you, that provides a tremendous assurance. And, as I said before, a confirmation, because the earthly ancestors are going to pass from the scene, but their God will be with me. That will allow the promise to unfold.
Can I throw one additional thing in there? First of all, If I'm not mistaken, we talked about this in the past. If you looked up all the dates, if you calculate all the dates based on the years that people are alive, once it turns from Yitzhak, we don't hear from Yitzhak again. We don't turn back, tell any more stories about Yitzhak, but I think that if you calculate the dates of Isaac, who's going to live to 180, I'm pretty sure that he will overlap with him again.
Oh,
still.
for sure. No, and they bury him, don't they? There's a scene where,
Well, but the question is whether he sees him alive.
Yeah. But one more thing, which is that there's another character who is like Jacob in this respect, and it's probably the single character who gets the Tanakh's most attention, and in the way that Yaakov gets Genesis's most attention is King David HaMelech. David HaMelech is similarly, as Elia, you said before, a character just larger than life. David HaMelech is prodigiously talented, incredibly lovable, capable of terrible behavior, and his greatness and his great spots are so great, his dark spots are so dark. And that's somewhat true of Yaakov Avinu as well. Great capacities. He goes to the well. He sees Rachel and his love at first sight. He works so hard. He has a magic touch. He succeeds at everything that he does. They'll be passed on to his son Yosef. And capable of like really bad behavior. And sort of we love him in his greatness and his sneakiness and his nastiness and his the awesome, the power of his great qualities is matched by the power of his capacity to fail.
So back to the promise there, Kilo e'ezavcha, I will not abandon you. And Jeremy, I want to pick up on the theme here that you've been saying, which is that there's something larger in Judaism here, that you're reading, I can read on the narrow level, the micro level, the personal, the character level. You're reading the larger mythic level, which is there's a greater narrative here of God and the Jewish people. And so would you concur on the Kilo Ezavcha here as putting the hint into the biblical reader, us, that this is also a great theme, that God is not going to abandon us, Totally.
Very good.
And that, of course, is, the great trauma that we've talked about in the past, that comes out at the end of the Torah is that there is a possibility that God, in fact, will abandon. I think that, even the thought of that is what triggers a whole set of crises among people.
So it might be worth thinking for a moment about how this works in terms of the narrative suite, because, emunah or faith originally was trustworthiness. And I think what we could say about God in Bereshit is that God is trustworthy.
Yeah.
He makes promises and he delivers. In the life of the nation, that's not always going to be felt. The people are going to experience, both willfully and not, the abandonment of God. And what they'll have to hold on to is the fulfillment of the promise made to the patriarchs. And somehow that has to restore in them their trust in God, because God is going to become less reliable as the Torah goes on, not more reliable.
I know there's so much in the Parsha that we unfortunately are not going to be able to get to, according, like the birth of all the tribes, etc. And, for better or worse, we're stuck here. So let's end with the coda.
It's a good place to be stuck.
It is a good place to go. The coda of the story, and you mentioned, I think Barry, you mentioned it just before, which is like, so he's always making deals, and here he's making a deal with God, and that he gets up, he anoints, he has a flask of oil or a skin of oil with him, and he pours it on the stone that he's lying on
his pillow.
Vayitzok shemen al rosha, he anoints it, and he calls the place Bethel, Ulam Luz Shema Ir Larishana. It was formerly named Luz, and he makes a vow there. And the vow is, if in fact God is with me, Ushmarani Baderech, and guards me on the way, Asher ani holech, that I'm going, Venatan li lechem lechol uveged ilbosh, and he gives me bread to eat and clothing to wear, V'shavti v'shalom beit avi, and gets me back in peace to my father's house. Vayadonai li Elohim, God will be my God. Va'even azot this stone that I've made as a monument, matzeva, Beit Elohim will be the temple. Everything that he gives me, I'm going to tithe. So you're saying then that that's his deal, and you're seeing in that the possibility of a certain chutzpah. I don't know, and I want to say, maybe there's possibility that he's empty. He's got nothing. Look, every time his father or his grandfather heard from God in a vision or in a speech or whatever, they built an altar, they took a sheep, they put it on the thing, they sacrificed, or they called out. He's got nothing. And later on he'll refer back to this. He said, "I left with my staff, and now I have a family." He is aware of himself as nothing.
So what I would offer a slightly different reading, that Jacob comes across as a businessman. Maybe not unlike the Hyman Roth character in Godfather 2, one of the great characters, but he's a businessman, and also he fancies himself more or less as a self-made man, right? He works for everything. He's going to spend 20 years with Lavan. He's going to spend 17 years in Egypt at the end of his life, a few weeks from now. And, we get the idea that Abraham didn't really work for what he got. It was kind of bestowed upon him. And Isaac, in a sense, inherits Abraham's wealth. But Jacob doesn't he starts with nothing, but he makes something of himself. Yeah. Something that I think neither his father nor his grandfather were able to do, in part because it wasn't necessary for them to do. But Jacob forges his own identity, and I think he deserves a great deal of credit for that.
He deserves it, and he loses out on many things, and he's crushed.
Well, he loses, but it becomes Beit El, so it's okay.
No, but
I just want to point out one thing, which is, our listeners probably know this or know this at some level. We have 54, I think, weekly parshiot or whatever it is in the course of a year, and that's the Babylonian 1 year annual Torah cycle. But in Eretz Yisrael, in the ancient times, they read much shorter parshiot, and you would complete the Torah over 3 years. So there's a way in which the breaking of parshiot that we have, that such and such is Parashat Vayetzei and such begins Parashat Vayishlach, is like arbitrary. That's what they did in Babylonia, but they did something else in the land of Israel, and they could have done something else yet again. And it's only the accidents of history that we broke out the way we did. But there's something about this parasha which is so tightly constructed. It's just beautiful. Everything that we just said, Jacob starts off, he's crossing into Mesopotamia, he's crossing out of the land of Israel, and he has this stone, and he sets up this matzeva. And at the very, very end of the parasha, he comes back 21 years later, he comes back with 2 wives and 2 concubines. He's got four wife-ish people, and he's got all the children, and he's got the conflict with Lavan, and Lavan chases him back down. His father-in-law chases him back down, says, you stole all my children. Jacob says, well, actually, they're my children. Let's make a pact. We're gonna divide. You stay on that side, I'll stay on this side. And they make another pillar.
Yeah.
And they make another witness, that also uses this word matzeva and ed, witness. And so this is an incredibly well-constructed parasha of, this is the story of when Jacob left the land of Israel, and when he returns back to the land of Israel and crosses the border. And that end passage has this very cool thing, which is the only use of Aramaic in the Torah itself. Jacob builds the pillar of witness, gal ed, that's what it means, the pillar of witness, the stone pillar, to be the witness of his agreement with Lavan. And Lavan calls it Yagar Sahaduta, which is gal ed in Aramaic. So you have this really cool little, so to speak, ancient linguistic artifact that shows up here in Genesis, only time in the whole Torah.
Basically, no, what you have there is the literary construction of boundary, because it's not only geographical boundary, it's ethnic boundary, and it's linguistic boundary.
Right. And
yeah, go ahead.
From beginning to end of the parsha, what we could say is Jacob rocks.
He does. Jacob just rocks the house. And you, Barry Chesler, are Yaakov, and I am Yaakov.
And I'm Yitzchak.
And you are Yitzchak. So we owe
there.
so much to you. And your son is Yaakov. This is a
There you
little
go.
portion of
My dad,
Yaakov.
was Avraham. You know, did you know that my father was Avraham? I'm Yitzchak, and my son is Yaakov.
That's pretty cool.
That is pretty cool. That is pretty cool. Anyway, wow, we have so much more to talk about. But I feel like we scratched the surface, but we went very deep too. So, thank you to our viewers, our listeners. We want to give you shout outs to all the people that are writing into us, and we really appreciate your comments. Keep them coming, and just thank you for spending the time with us, enjoying Torah together. We look forward to seeing you again on the next edition of Parsha Talk. Now, Shabbat Shalom.